Amik Robertson was one of the Detroit Lions' most surprising players from a season ago. A free agent acquisition from 2024 that was a little bit undersized, a little bit too scrappy, and one of those players that you always had to question why weren't they a Detroit Lions sooner? He embodies the strength of the Detroit Lions. He embodies the grit, the hard work, the determination, fighting through the adversity, no matter what the obstacle may be. For Amik Robertson, that obstacle is his size. Standing at just 5'9", 183 pounds, he's often been overlooked in his NFL career. He was a free agent in 2024, as I said, after spending the last 4 seasons with the Las Vegas Raiders. He was a 4th-round pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, and largely went that late due to his size at the cornerback position. He's always been strong. He's always been scrappy. He's even always been productive for every team that he's been on, whether it be the LA Tech Bulldogs or the Las Vegas Raiders. But he's always going to get overlooked because he is small. He is undersized. He doesn't have the length to be an elite NFL cornerback, and yet that hasn't stopped him so far. His biggest performance from a season ago came in Week 18, when the lights were the brightest, the stage was the biggest, and they needed a win more than anything. The 14-2 Lions met with the 14-2 Minnesota Vikings, not only for bragging rights and a crown in the NFC North, but for the NFC's #1 seed, a bye in the playoff, and getting their team one step closer to a Super Bowl. Now, obviously, that didn't happen for either team. The Detroit Lions would lose in the divisional round, getting blown out at home to the Washington Commanders, while the Minnesota Vikings would go on the road and get blown out there, or I guess at a neutral site in Arizona, by the Los Angeles Rams in the wild card round. But that doesn't take away from the night that Amik Robertson had. Guarding Justin Jefferson, a player that guarded him in high school, and players that have a long history together, he played arguably the best game of the season from any secondary member the Lions had. In Week 18, going up against Justin Jefferson, Amik Robertson was targeted 10 times, allowed 5 receptions for 57 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and 2 passes defended. While there wasn't a massive game-changing interception or a big game-breaking play, Amik Robertson was solid all night long. He was physical at the line of scrimmage, knocked Justin Jefferson off his routes many times, and forced incompletions even if he wasn't directly getting his hands on the ball, disrupting Jefferson off the line, getting him a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit frustrated. He had a drop or two which didn't help with that, and Amik Robertson was in his head and in his pocket the entire night and for the entire game. Amik Robertson's 2024 season was really good as well, playing 17 games for the Detroit Lions, but only starting 4. As a slot cornerback, starts really aren't the biggest concern. It obviously depends what your defense is on the first play of the game on whether or not you will start or sit as a defensive back, and particularly as a nickel back in what Amik Robertson plays. But even still, he was contributing in all 17 games last season with 50 tackles, 4 TFLs, 8 passes defended, and 3 forced fumbles as the Detroit Lions' primary slot cornerback. Taking a look at some of the more advanced statistics, he was targeted 88 times on the season, allowed 54 catches for a 61.4% completion rate, slightly below average in the NFL, but again, that includes boundary cornerbacks. Slot is one of the hardest positions to play. It gives you the most space to have to cover. It puts you against some of the shiftiest wide receivers in the NFL, some of the best separators that there are in this league, and Amik Robertson did pretty well. He did get beat a couple times, in particular against the Bears and Keenan Allen. Justin Jefferson had his number a couple of times here and there throughout the season. Those are where his 2 touchdowns came against, but he played okay with a 61.4% completion rate, 632 yards allowed, and 2 touchdowns on the season. He did okay. He was not a liability by any means for the Detroit Lions, but much like the rest of their cornerback room, he didn't really have any production, didn't come away with any interceptions, didn't have any really big game-changing plays. The 3 forced fumbles were, of course, really helpful for the defense, but as far as taking the ball away through the air, he didn't contribute very much in that part of his game. In the playoff game, he was injured very early. On just the first drive of the game, Amik Robertson would be carted to the hospital, put in an ambulance, and brought to a local Detroit medical center because he had broken his shoulder. It was a shoulder fracture on one of the first plays of the game, and that really set the tone. It took all the air out of the stadium that had spent weeks getting ready for the playoffs. Fans that had spent multiple weeks watching the playoffs, knowing their team was #1. They came into the building, they were loud, they were ready, and Amik Robertson gets hurt almost immediately, deflates the entire atmosphere. And certainly that's not the reason they lost that game. They were outplayed by the Commanders, but I don't think that injury helped. Losing your best cornerback on the first drive of your first playoff game of the season is never a good sign for an NFL team. The good thing is, despite being in the later stages of the season for his injury to occur, it is a short-term injury. It's an injury that he's already had successful surgery to kind of put his shoulder back together and put it in a position to heal properly, and the injury should only take about 3 months to heal, meaning at this point, he likely is back to 100% physically and now in the stages of physical rehab. With over 2 months to go until training camp and over 3 months to go to the NFL season, Amik Robertson should be well back to his normal self before the NFL season actually arrives. The question, though, now becomes, will Amik Robertson still have a place in the Detroit Lions secondary when he returns? I think there's a lot of competition. And in particular, I think there's a lot of competition at the slot cornerback position in general. Ennis Rakestraw was supposed to start over Amik Robertson in week 2 of the NFL season. We did a video about him talking about the injury concerns and why he didn't play a lot in his rookie season. But if he's healthy, Ennis could potentially take that spot. He's a player that has played slot in the past at Missouri, has played slot at training camp, and played in the NFL just a little bit here and there for spot rotations. And even though he hasn't had the biggest role in the defense, this is a former second-round pick, a guy that's bigger, longer, maybe even more athletic than Amik Robertson, a bit more physical because he can be at a bigger size. And I think if you compare the two, you want Ennis Rakestraw to start more than you want a guy like Amik Robertson to start. Brian Branch is the de facto starter at slot cornerback if the Detroit Lions aren't running a 2 or 3 safety set. If it's a single high safety and Brian Branch is not playing that safety position, he will almost certainly be in the slot. He is one of those players that has to be on the field every single play. He's too good, too valuable, and too productive not to be for the Detroit Lions. When they play 2 high safeties, Brian Branch is the strong safety. When they play a single high safety, Brian Branch can often be found in the slot, mirroring wide receivers, taking that responsibility and forcing Amik Robertson back to the sideline. And of course, the most recent free agent acquisition in Avonte Maddox, a player that has started at slot for several years for the Philadelphia Eagles, took a back seat this year and played lesser snaps in a lesser role in the Super Bowl caliber team, but he has been an NFL starting slot cornerback in the past. He's been a piece, and a valuable piece at that, to really good secondaries over the last 6 to 7 seasons in the NFL, and you shouldn't count him out of this spot either. Amik Robertson has been a big trade candidate for the Detroit Lions this year, with many different articles and many different analysts saying that he could be a player the Lions look to move on from. He has 1 year left on his contract that has $6.4 million due to him this season. If the Lions were to trade or cut Amik Robertson, they would have $4.25 million in savings and $2.15 million of dead cap. So they wouldn't be freeing up a ton of space, but they also wouldn't really be having too much of a dead cap burden to take on. So trading him could potentially work, but I don't see that being the future. I don't see that necessarily taking place here this year. I think what's more likely is he plays out his final season in Detroit and either walks in free agency or could even potentially sign an even longer term deal in Detroit, knowing that the Detroit Lions want him to stick around. The boundary depth chart at cornerback is pretty deep. DJ Reed, you'd have to assume is cornerback number 1. Terrion Arnold, you'd assume is cornerback 3. Ennis Rakestraw, I believe, will be cornerback 3 as well. And then you have Amik Robertson, you have Avonte Maddox, you have Rocky Sin, players that could start on the boundary. You probably don't want starting on the boundary, but have shown the ability to do so in the past. Amik Robertson, as we just talked about, did so against one of the best receivers in football last season in Justin Jefferson, and did a really, really nice job. You have Rocky Sin, who's played many slot and many boundary cornerback roles throughout the NFL seasons. Avonte Maddox has played both, had a game-stealing PBU as a boundary cornerback in the Super Bowl just this last February. But I don't think Amik Robertson is really competing for that boundary spot. If they need him to, he will certainly play it. But his biggest role and where he plays his best football is as a slot and nickel cornerback. And there, It's a little bit different. Brian Branch is the slot cornerback on single safety sets. I think Amik Robertson will come in as the backup slot cornerback, but also just the slot cornerback when the Lions do have two safeties on the field, because that does happen quite a bit at the time. Nickel defense typically has 5 DBs on the field, 2 safeties and 3 cornerbacks, and that's where Amik Robertson sees a majority of his snaps. I think Avonte Maddox takes a backseat behind that while playing a bit of a depth safety role and a bit of a depth cornerback role. I think he's there to be kind of the last resort guy, much like Roy Lopez is on the defensive line. I think Avonte Maddox is more of a third safety, more of a third cornerback, kind of, hey, we don't necessarily want him to play a lot of snaps, but if we get to that point, we feel comfortable putting Avonte Maddox on the field. And then I think last resort after that is Ennis Rakestraw. Again, has the experience, but Kelvin Shepard, the new defensive coordinator, has said numerous times they want him to focus on boundary cornerback. That's where they want him to develop. That's where they want him to be. And I think that's the right choice for his career long term. But that is kind of the depth chart right now. Amik Robertson, I think, has a chance to play. I think will play quite a bit in the NFL season. He'll play behind Brian Branch in certain packages. He'll play alongside Brian Branch in others. He'll be kind of a slot, a boundary cornerback, and really kind of a glue piece in the secondary to play anywhere that he is needed. But I think one thing is for sure. Amik Robertson is one of the most underrated players on this defense. He brings a tone, he sets a level, and he is one of the most physical Detroit Lions-esque players you could find. He fits the grit, he fits the mindset, he fits the toughness, and he fits Detroit better than almost any cornerback or even any member of that secondary. And for that being the case, I think he has a very bright future here. But let me know down in the comments below what you think. Do you think Amik Robertson can run it back and have just as good, if not better, of a season with the Detroit Lions? Or do you think he'll maybe take a back seat, let some of the younger players like Avonte Maddox, let some of the younger players like Ennis Rakestraw continue to grow in that role and eventually get replaced by depth and walk in free agency? I'd love to hear your guys' opinions, but with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions!